angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology, conspiracy, discovery, special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV.
Hi folks, this is Tom Horn again, coming to you from the studios here in Missouri at Skywatch TV. And once again, so privileged to be able to have my good friend Steve Quayle in the studio with me. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Tom. It's really great to be back and to take the next series of amazing events and amazing fulfillments of prophecy and our mutual investigations and research expeditions going on concurrently, unknown to either one of us. The only time we find out what each other is doing is we do radio interviews together. So now we're beating that. We're doing a jump step. We're doing it on TV.
Yeah, but it makes me wonder what next is going to happen between the two of us. Maybe we'll talk about that in a moment with Timothy Alberino's project. We're going to be talking mostly today about this book that you put out recently called True Legends. And I love that title, by the way, because you know, we have these legends throughout the United States of America, throughout the world. Everybody seems to have their mythos, and yet there's such commonalities in the stories that were told that seem to attest to a time when there really were things that were going on in the world that involved giants and things like that. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, speaking of giants, I learned recently that Timothy Alberino, who is your partner in crime, your partner in filmmaking, he's been producing a whole lot of just world-class, like mini documentaries that you guys are putting up.
That's a good word.
What's the name of your film company?
Gen 6, short for Genesis 6 Productions. Yeah. And you know, thanks for bringing it up, because Tim just got back. Today's, what, the 21st, 22nd of, what month is this, April?
All right.
Yeah, you know, I keep strange hours, but Tim just got back from a 3-week trip to Peru, and we had a fascinating series of events that happened, and obviously Skywatch will be airing it. But what we're up to pretty much, Tom, is we're tracking down the giant cover-up that's taking place on multiple continents, multiple cultures, and I think I can explain to people the number one question that the doubters and the skeptics have. Well, where are all the skeletons? Well, Tim just returned from Peru, and fascinating, he was at Tiwanaku, he was in Bolivia, and he said in Bolivia they're undertaking a new dig, and the Bolivians just announced a whole new pyramid find. And what's fascinating is no matter where Tim has been in the last 3 months, Sardinia, obviously in Europe, Peru, Bolivia, and a couple points in between, the fascinating thing is, number one, they're always followed. Number two, everybody they interview, that's, let's say, over 75 years to 80 years, has a common, if you will, statement of who comes in to grab all the artifacts, especially when it's giant-related. They're talking about helicopters landing at night. They're talking about big helicopters lifting very heavy items. And in Peru, for instance, one of the amazing things at a place called Sacsayama, I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but the fascinating thing is that they ran into an engineer who is a secular engineer that said the ancients had to have had a way to liquefy the stone, because the stone in some instances flows in and pours in together, just like you and I, you know, playing with Play-Doh, fitting piece A to piece B. Now, this is a secular engineer, but fascinatingly enough, that every place that Tim went, they were followed most of the time. It didn't matter if it was in Sardinia. The hush-hush, there were people that were actually afraid to go on camera. We had many times we could only record their voice because they were afraid of them. And interesting, them was the Vatican. Well, obviously, if anybody knows the history, and you well know, but of South America, Latin America, and even different parts of Europe, there's a absolute stranglehold on true artifacts and true history. But what was mind-blowing to both of us, and even the people that accompanied, whether they were translators, a film crew, is just how touchy anybody was for filming. It was okay if you filmed on the right hand, but don't go over on the left hand. The right hand was like I would call staged artifact. Some of the most famous artifacts you see on the Ancient Alien series and all the different, they've been moved from a place where they really made sense to a place where they don't make sense. Tim said an interesting thing. Tim said it was like, Steve, you could see the pre-flood building and you can see the post-flood building. They'll let you see all the post-flood building you want, but they won't let you see the pre-flood stuff. In Bolivia, they were met by armed guards carrying machine guns. So that's what we're up against. Now, this is important, Tom, for your research too. There are people working overtime to keep the truth of what is really out there and true history. I said in an earlier interview, they who control the past determine the future. If you and I are only told 3 points on a 12-point instruction to follow, we don't do good after maybe 4 or 5. We're going to mess it up. So by keeping people in this state of, I would call, I've got to be really careful here, I call mainstream media vomit brokers, okay? So by them only giving...
And that's being careful.
That's being careful. That's the best I can do. You know, either that or I have a mouthful of soap. The point being is that they want to regurgitate some facts, but most fiction, into the narrative, whether it's anything that you and I talk about collectively. Yet when you go to the desert Southwest, you and Chris go down there, Chris Putnam, or Tim's going here, or I'm going to a Native American reservation, you'll find out that there's a whole different world out there that these people who lived and their ancestors chronicled it, and people absolutely see the Norway spiral, but they can't accept the fact that, gee, how did the Native Americans, or how did, 4,000-year-old civilizations, why do they all use the universal symbol?
Right.
And,
but now this is also part of a documentary or a series of documentaries.
Series of documentaries.
So tell me about that. What you're doing, of course, is kind of producing documentation and in documentary format of a lot of stuff that you already have been investigating for some time on the presence of giants, but also even like you talk about Amaruca, if I'm saying it right, like the whole origin of how America got its name. And the Freemasons even write about this, don't they? Talking about where the knowledge of the mystical schools came from. Here, as it came from the plumed serpents? The
plumed serpent, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, both in the Aztec and Mayan history. The plumed serpent, Amaruca, or Ameruca. That's what the South American and the high cultures called America, and that's land of the plumed serpent. Now, when you see pictures of Quetzalcoatl, you know the classic representation is a feathered serpent. Almost looks like basically the reptilians in the old science fiction movie V with a whole bunch of feathers. I know that's simplistic, but that's what it is. So by finding out where all of these customs that came in the United States. There was a time, for instance, where people, even the major anthropology magazines, never wanted to admit that the Native Americans necessarily in the desert Southwest were cannibals. I remember fighting that argument 40 years ago. So the point being now is, or the Anasazi, the ancient ones, which you and Chris, have talked, or the alien ones. What is the central theme in all these, by the way, is cannibalism. Now what we're seeing in the headlines is cannibalism. You're seeing it in all shapes and forms, whether it's the Christian, our brethren in Syria being slaughtered and basically cannibalized, their meat sold for meat in the market, and the world, especially the Western church, is silent. That makes me just go, I said this, the customs of the ancient ones will come into the contemporary times, and you'll know we're in the end times. And that's exactly, now, there was very little cannibalism 20 years ago. Maybe the case of the airliner that went down in the Andes, and situation survival. But there was never, basically cookbooks on the internet and people advertising for people to come and basically let someone kill them as as in the case of Germany, and eat them.
It's interesting because, you mentioned me and Chris had been doing, again, investigative work, not even knowing you were working on this brand new book, True Legends, where you're taking the stories that had been told by many of the American Indian tribes and the legends of the stories. I want to ask you in a few moments about the Smithsonian. Don't let me forget to ask you about that. But while you were doing that, we were actually going to the Four Corners area. Chris went down to the, to the southern end of the Anasazi Trail, as I started calling it, in Sedona. And what does he find there in Sedona but the presence of the Vatican, had built, and in an area where nobody else is allowed to build. They get to build this kind of Catholic thing. It's the church. It's a monastery sticking out of the side of the mountain. We found the same thing on the top of Mount Graham. Everywhere there seems to be these portals and these entities, it's like there's a very strong presence there, as if they know something we don't know, or they're pursuing something ahead of us. But the point I was going to make is I got a chance to sit down with Dr. Don Mose. And he's a third-generation medicine man. He is he's an academic, or he's a retired academic in the Navajo Nation. I should have brought his book and showed it to you, where he had an artist depict giants that used to be in the United States. Some of them that look like they're 200 feet tall. It took whole tribes to bring them down. And when they finally got them down and cut their head off, there was so much blood that came out, it flowed down into the valley like it was forming a small river. This is in the books that he had written. Well, here's the interesting thing. I'm interviewing him, and I ask him, so tell us, what happened to the Anasazi? And he starts, telling the tale that they hear in school. Well, there was a drought, and then 7 years of a drought, they follow, they start migrating slowly away. But I raised questions about that. I said, and yet when the archaeologists first went into those cliff dwellings, they found that they had disappeared overnight. They didn't slowly migrate away. They left everything, bags of salt that would have been like gold, right? So where did they go? Well, he looks at the camera. We have this on film. And he says, well, I shouldn't tell you this, but if you were to ask my great-grandfather, this is a story that he would have told. And Steve, it was like he had opened up True Legends and started reading, because he talks of a portal, the serpent deceiver that comes through the portal, the six-toed giants. But he also says that this deceiver started teaching the people cannibalism. That was my whole point. They started eating one another. The giants were eating them. We did follow-up research that isn't even in our book, where we found old university archaeological digs where they found Anasazi that had literally been ripped apart. They found their bones, the sinew, the flesh had been literally ripped apart and left on the ground.
The rib cage is split.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you would say that, Tom, because, again, this illustrates it. In the book Long Walkers, a pilot who was an active-duty Air Force pilot flew into Bagram Air Force Base, I believe, in the year 2005. And I know him personally, came to my store, bona fides, verified, etc., and told the story. Now, you just talked about being ripped apart. Well, he was tasked with flying a dead giant who had cannibalized a squad of Marines that were going in looking for Bin Laden's boys, Al-Qaeda in the caves and everything. And interestingly enough, the very description that was given to the team that basically produced the giant cadaver for him, and takes a special way of killing giants, he said it was like their rib cages were ripped apart. Isn't that interesting? So you're in the desert Southwest talking to that very intelligent man, and his grandfather, I would tell you this, would know more about the truth than all the twisting.
Well, Dr. Mose is a third-generation Navajo Nation medicine man and oral historian whose books are used in their schools. So, yeah, he's no Johnny-come-lately.
I think the big discrepancy between fact and fantasy is that as the older generation dies off, this is why Tim, he's sitting on a reed island in Lake Titicaca, okay? And he's interviewing I think is like a 75 or 80-year-old man who only speaks the language that has to be translated into Spanish. Now, Tim speaks perfect Spanish and lived in Peru, so that helps. But it's always the same story. So they're talking about the helicopters coming in, talking about cannibalistic giants, and how's this for an interesting story? They go to a place called Amaramuru, which is a Stargate location, an actual Stargate. So they have shamans there, and they're ringing a bell, and they're taking like a metal object, and like you would take your thumb and make a crystal glass hum, they're basically making all these different noises. Now, I've been told by the people that know a lot about this stuff that Stargates work on words, sounds, and a power source. I never found out what the power source was. But while Tim, Vinny, and Benny, those are the three guys in the crew, are camped out at the Stargate, it rains, it hails. They've got this on video. And he said it was the most strangest thing they've ever seen, because around them, everything was clear. But right where they were was, if you will, this directed hailstorm. He said it was so furious that they had to go and get half the village to come and pull their car out and dig their car out of the mud, because basically they had gone up there to see this event. But the strangest lightning, the strangest sound. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that in your findings and our corollary investigation research, the common denominators are always the same. I think I've told you this before, I mentioned it on the radio. I was contacted by a major film studio years ago, 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago, and they wanted to know if I would be willing to make the Giants rewrite a movie script that I had written, and basically making the Giants nice people. And I said, fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Doesn't sound to me like they're eating burgers, okay? Right. So the point being is that even Shrek, there was a cartoon, and they made Shrek. An ogre is a human-eating monster, O-G-R-E. Yeah, not Congress, because there's some of those guys too. Those just eat the fruit of the land. But the point being is that we're seeing now in the corollary investigations that we're doing, the common denominators. And the Anasazi, it's fascinating. You jump to Easter Island now, and Easter Island used to have a curse, and the curse was, your grandmother's flesh lies rotting in my teeth. Lovely, huh? That was a National Geographic. So there's been a cover-up, because, again, what's troubling to me is that I see the parasitical appetite of demons coming into common acceptance. I don't play video games. I can honestly say I don't think I've ever played one more than 2 minutes, and then my attention span was over, and my manual dexterity is not what it used to be. I was teasing you about Joe. I love the way he plays the guitar. Yeah. My thumbs and fingers don't move that fast anymore. But the thing that's fascinating to me is that the theme in these video games is getting darker and darker. Do you know what the #1 selling comic book and cartoon series is in Japan? It's about man-eating giants, okay? And these are like 200-foot tall giants. So when you asked me earlier what's the difference about this Genesis 6 revised volume versus the first one I wrote, is the Woods document. They're 200, 300, 400-foot giants, especially Polyphemus. That goes right back to the Cyclops. That goes right back to Jason the Argonauts. It goes right back. And the Greeks, for instance, one of the, two ancient wonders of the world was, good night, the Colossus of Rhodes. That was that was 99 feet, and it spanned the harbor. Then you have the Temple of Zeus, which is kind of a portrayal on Genesis 6 giants, and that was a real temple where real giants sat. And held court. And these guys were in their 40 and 50 and 60 foot tall. So, Paul Bunyan and all those stories may have been dismissed when you found out from your Native American contact, and I'm hearing the same thing from my contacts around the world, because when you and I go on talk radio, it goes all over the world, and millions of people listen, and we'll hear from Australia, we'll hear from Siberia, we'll hear from all over the place. I mean, I've heard people say, we listen to you on satellite radio. And I said, you mean like Sirius? He said, oh, no, we're on satellite. We're getting you from the satellite downlink. So they must be in some research facility or have some capability. But those are the kind of people that make contact with us to give us the leads we follow up. And so I think it's time, I refer to this over and over, it's time for those hidden things to be revealed. And again, the people of God have nothing to fear. Now, if they know what's coming and we're articulating it, defining it, and preparing them for it, then they will deal with it in victory versus in subterfuge, defeat, and total panic.
We've been talking here with my good friend Steve Quayle. You can see why I love talking to Steve, right? How do you do this with no notes? I mean, you have a mind like a steel trap. Right now, we've been talking about the book True Legends, and this is one of your newest books. This just only came out just a few months ago.
No, that one came out about a year ago.
About 1 year ago.
Little Creatures about 6 months ago.
Actually, this is even newer than that, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's new. That's like 2 weeks old.
Little Creatures, and then Genesis 6 Giants. This is actually the what is this, a third edition, or it's your new edition? It's an expanded?
It's a new edition, but if it were going by the old line, it would be the 10th printing of it.
Okay. But we're making all three of Steve Quayle's books available to you at a very special price. We're also throwing in we typically retail this for $30, Volume 1 of the Researcher's Library of Ancient Texts. This is the Apocrypha, but it has many of the books that you'll find sourced in Steve's books, like the Book of Enoch and some of the other ancient works like Jubilees, which also talks about the giants, also talks about the return of the giants and the fallen angels. Normally, these books all sell for $40 each because they're 2 to 3 times as big as anybody else's works. That would normally, between those 3 books and the Apocrypha, that would be $150 value, but we are making that available to you during these programs only for a special price of $99. If you call in the number that's on the screen, or if you visit skywatchtv.com, you will be able to get these books from our online store. If you call in, just tell them that you're looking for the Steve Quayle package, the Steve Quayle special, and you'll get all of those books for the special price of $99. Of course, we have each one of these available in the store for sale by themselves. If you want to buy just Genesis 6 Giants or the new Little Creatures book, I'm sure that we'd be happy to make those available to them too. Well, Steve, we've got about 5 minutes left here, and there's a question I just keep wanting to get to.
Let's go for it.
And it's the question of the Smithsonian. In your book, right towards the very beginning of True Legends, you tell a story that some people are familiar with, probably most people are not familiar with. Some people just call this the Great Smithsonian Cover-Up. Tell me about that.
Well, first of all, the Smithsonian was basically founded by a man named Smithson, obviously where you get the name Smithsonian, and he hired a gentleman named Powell, for instance, who was a pretty well-known expedition leader. Lake Powell is named after him, but he became the curator. He suffered from a thing called isolationism. He wouldn't allow the thought that there were other civilizations and or people that had the ability to, number one, travel by ship. He thought that everybody grew up in an isolated area, and some people call that isolationism. Some people call it uniformitarianism, but that's as opposed to diffusionism, where everybody went everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to remind people that the Smithsonian, from its very beginning, had the official party line that was pretty much established by Powell. And he would not allow any conflicting evidence, although I do quote in there, there's one quote of his that basically says, I can't account for this stuff outside of, a more advanced civilization and culture having generated it. In other words, he denies everything until the very end, and then he says, but I can't account for it. Everyone is familiar with the classic scene in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where obviously at the end, after the Nazis and after the retaking of the Ark, and it's put into a crate and it's being taken down this massive, huge warehouse on a forklift and just placed in some indiscriminate spot in the warehouse out of the eyes of everyone to see. The reason the giant bones, now here's the bottom, here is I would say the definitive statement. The reason the Smithsonian does not allow the truth to come out on this is because giants would indicate that the biblical narrative is accurate and would totally undermine Darwinian evolution, okay? And if you know the history of anthropology, there are times when the anthropologists believe that the Piltdown Man and some of the Peking men and all these anthropological supposed species that existed, they had the jawbone of something, and they built a whole mythological creature around it. Well, if they can believe a lie then and perpetuate that lie and then only grudgingly admit it was false, what makes us think that they're telling the truth about anything? Good example. We're now seeing NASA. There was never water on the moon. Now there's once water on the moon. Mm-hmm. There was never water on Mars, yet they're finding there was water on Mars, We're seeing all these hints, and you and I have talked about it, the alien agenda. Here's what's key. In every area that you and I have investigated or will investigate, wherever there's a military base, Tom, wherever there's a Catholic presence heavy, those are mystical, and there are also electromagnetic contact points like Sedona. Good night. They consider that one of the most important vortexes or power centers between dimensions in the world. Well, that's what Timothy Alberino and the film crew were down in Peru, all over Peru, basically tracking down. And I would say this, if you go out and it's a bright blue sky, you camp out in front of a known Stargate, and all of a sudden you've got an isolated weather war against you. Obviously somebody or something was not happy with the presence. I won't say it's a supernatural thing, but it's certainly an unusual thing, and even the natives couldn't figure that one out.
Yeah, and deities try to emulate God, so that how Israel in the Old Testament would follow God, and they would follow the cloud, right?
Correct.
God created what we could almost explain in chemistry, but he did it miraculously so that they would follow it. And the demons always try to emulate him. They always try to be like he is. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. This is what they want, right? They
Absolutely. Want to be
worshipped as gods. So it'd make great sense. In fact, in True Legends, you talk about the storm gods, and so there's mythology and storyline that go around that whole concept since forever that would make you then wonder. Timothy goes down. He's with a group of people. He's in an area that's supposed to be a portal. Beautiful weather all over the place, and a storm just decides to come right over the top of them and have a hissy fit because they are there. Of course, electromagnetism. They can read that in the ground. Like you mentioned, Sedona, it's off the chart. And that, of course, can also play a role in our weather patterns. We've only got 45 seconds left in this program, so I'm just going to have to beg you if you can at least come back one more time. We thought we would do 2 shows, then 3. I think we're going to have a 4th show, if you will.
I'll do it.
Okay. Folks, once again, wonderful being here on the set at Skywatch TV with my good friend Steve Quayle. You would think that with all of the years of and hundreds of hours of radio that you and I have done together, that we would have been in each other's presence before. But this is actually the first time that we've sat down next to each other, and this time I couldn't be happier to have him. And we're gonna when the Timothy Alberino, Steve Quayle Gen 6 products become available, you'll see them here.
The supernatural realm is real, and we humans are naturally curious about it. That's why there are so many television reality shows featuring ghost hunters and alien chasers and mediums and psychics. Well, by and large, the Christian church avoids these controversial topics, even though we have the authoritative book on the subject. That's our mission at Skywatch TV, is to address issues of the paranormal and the supernatural from a Christian, a biblical perspective. But we depend on your support to do it. To find out how you can support Skywatch TV prayerfully and financially, please log on to our website, skywatchtv.com. And keep watching as we keep watch at Skywatch TV.
Angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology, conspiracy, discovery, special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV.
Hi, folks. This is Tom Horn once again from Skywatch Television, and somehow, some way, we were able to con my good friend Steve Quayle into staying here and doing another program. Actually, you couldn't con Steve into doing anything. He stayed by his good graces. Hi, Steve. Good to see you again.
Tom, well, I'm excited to be here. Now, I don't mind. You know, I'm serious. I think you and I could sit here and talk for like 8 hours straight, and people would be fascinated because we'd start here, go to another point in the universe, come back to where we were, and we would be all over the place. But by the end of the show, people would be going, how did they get from there to here? But we're here, you know?
Yeah, which is interesting because we've been talking about portals. We've been talking about CERN. Somehow we kind of create our own traversable wormholes during a program. We bend space and then come back to the beginning somehow. And speaking of that, that is what we left off the last program, talking about portals. Now, you've written these books. Your newest book is Little Creatures, and it's associated with that idea that there are doorways and that things can and do come through those doorways. You and I both believe not only do they come through the doorways, but a time is coming when prophecy says those gates are going to be fully opened, and then it's going to be like the floodgates of literally hell on earth is going to spill over into the earth. Do you think that what's going on right now at CERN, as we're sitting here talking, CERN has fired up its engines, it's getting ready to conduct the most powerful experiments ever done on the face of the earth by colliding literally hundreds of millions of particles together at just under the speed of light. But CERN's own director, he said, you know, we may open a doorway and we may send something through it, or something may come through from a parallel universe. What in the world are these guys trying to accomplish?
Well, the late friend of both of ours, David Flynn, when he would write about the Ouroboros, I was interesting that we would be talking about this because CERN, in the dimension of the particle accelerator, is a type, actually, of the Ouroboros. And the image that I was given one day when I was just praying about this out of the blue is, imagine a time tunnel with two funnels, CERN being on the earthly side and the Ouroboros being the heavenly side.
And the Ouroboros, for those that don't understand, is this serpent swallowing its tail. It's an ancient symbol.
It's an ancient symbol, but it's based on the Milky Way and its motion. But the point being, Tom, is that when you have the head of CERN making that type of announcement, you know, it absolutely should cause people to take note. Now, some have taken note. I was contacted by a group of scientists through a third party claiming that they're seeing entities. And when you hear that it's been shut down for a crumb or some other hokey excuse, no, that's not the case. I can tell you, one time it was shut down, somebody intervened, okay? I don't know who, but somebody intervened, obviously God, and used a group of individuals to do it. And interestingly enough, they claim they were able to gate in and gate out. Some people won't believe that. But here's the thing. CERN is absolutely an affront to the living God. They actually believe, the Luciferians, Illuminati, that they're going to make war against God and they're going to prevail. They're going to prevail using fallen angel technology. Well, if it couldn't keep the fallen angels in heaven the first time, it's not going to seed the finals time. And this is what people don't understand. The end-time battle is not just with guns and tanks and missiles and lasers and space-based weapon systems and alien technology. It is a supernatural weapon. Even the Bible teaches that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. A stronghold exists in the supernatural realm. And as we're dealing with CERN and Shiva, the destroyer, I find it interesting that the symbology of CERN is the Hindu deity Shiva and the cosmic dance of creation and destruction. Now, of course, on the destruction, I think they're trying to get up to an interesting number, 13 trillion electron volts, 13 TeVs, okay? Well, when they rev to that TeV, I don't think they're going to understand and be able to contain the unintended consequence. Now, again, if people would get this through their mind, especially Christians, we're seeing it with the persecution all over the world, that there is now the global release of a supernatural evil not known to this degree across the whole world. It's like everything is a timepiece with all the sprockets, gears, balance wheels or imbalance wheels, all functioning, and it's all turning in essence those giant tumblers on the vault of all the supernatural coming into our dimension. I was just speaking to Chris Putnam earlier during the break, and I said, "Oh, what a joy it is to meet somebody who's a fellow supernaturalist." And he's sitting off camera right now. But the point being is that what has happened is that the professing believers have lost all contact with the true nature of a holy God, of a God who's omnipotent, omniscient, and they've lost track of who they are in Jesus Christ. Because God's image in us is his likeness and image in Genesis, and now the very people that you and I are always talking about and against are saying they can do a better job at the recreation of mankind than God did in the beginning. And they're promising eternal life, eternal sexual favor, and for the record, the biggest money going into robotics and AI are by that industry. That was tough for a lot of people to take until they read it in Drudge, yesterday or the day before. Now we've got longevity, and they basically made the statement, again, on the biggest newspapers of the world, man will not die. That sounds to me like somebody who was a snake telling Eve a lie that she believed, and now we all got to buy back what Adam and Eve surrendered in the Garden of Eden. And we're seeing a total assault, A-S-S-A-U-L-T, and insult against the person of Lord Jesus Christ. Anything else is fair game. Anyone else, you can worship the trees, frogs. You can do anything you want in this day and age except name the name of Jesus. The military has declared war on Jesus. They absolutely are kicking out. Now, why is this critical? Because those entities, we're talking about seducing and deceiving spirits. We're talking about a supernatural group of beings or entities that are now basically influencing the willing dupes on earth, that they basically believe they're going to be gods. And you and I, in all the years, and it's kind of fun to come here and reflect back, here being Missouri, or should I say Missouri?
Missouri.
Missouri, okay. I always get in trouble. If I say Madrid, they tell me it's Madrid. If I say Madrid, it's Madrid, okay? Well, anyway, here in Missouri, the point being is that we're now discussing events that are taking place half a world away. We're seeing, what are we seeing? We're seeing, just in this last week, we're seeing multitude 6.6, 6.8 earthquakes. So the harmonics of the very, if you will, the frequencies of God's creation. I tell people this, remember this, God said, let there be light. Sound preceded light. And it's fascinating because even the Hebrews and some of antiquity teaches that God sang the worlds into existence. Now, that may be hard for people to believe, but Lucifer's job before he became Satan was the worship of God, Ezekiel 28. And the thing is, the tabrets and the pipes were his. That means he was a musical instrument. If you look at the power of music, the transformation of the human brain by specific frequencies, and Joe would know about this, 440A is not the good tuning to be tuning to. A lot of people say the harmonics of creation should be closer to 432A. Well, that's not just a guitar tuning regimen. There's an actual purpose in that, because one produces harmony, true harmony. I'm not talking about singing harmony, but I'm talking about, if you will, subatomic harmony versus dissonance. And so when you and I begin to talk about forbidden gates, I want to make this clear to people that the ancients knew not only how to move these gates, but how to move between these gates. And even the former head of Skunk Works made the statement years ago, if the American people ever really knew that anything they can conceive of, we've already been there and done that. Well, with alien, quote, technology, and also, I would say this, the surrender of their humanity, the whole idea is just to fulfill the devil's desire, and that's to kill every last man, woman, and child on the face of the earth, so that there would be no flesh left alive. And what does God say? That would happen, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be short. Yeah,
and it's interesting that you bring up this whole question about sound waves preceded creation and light, and yet and what they're doing there at CERN is they're trying to discover subatomic particles and shatter these protons and see what the subatomic particles are made out of. But they're looking for things like quarks, and they're looking for gluon. And you might recall that you and I, back when CERN was first going to launch years ago, we did a whole series of shows. In fact, I think they still make them available through Survivor Mall. I think that's called the Days of Noah.
I remember that series.
But that series, The Days of Noah, had a lot to do with, hey, folks, they're getting ready to fire up a Titanic machine by the name of CERN, and here's what they're looking for. And we talked then about they're going to want to try to open portals. They're trying to find gluon, though, is one of the subatomic theoretical particles, or it works with those particles for the purposes of kind of holding everything together. You know, in the standard physics model, you have negative and positive charged particles that ought to repel each other. They don't. So we try to understand what glues them together. What is gluon? And the best we know is it has something to do with sound waves. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. But if they can, but is the sound waves, because the New Testament also says that everything is held together by Jesus, who was the incarnation of the Word of God, right? Why would they be trying to track down that element that is biblical, that called everything into creation, spoke, bara, let there be, and said, and caused these particles to come together to create everything that we can see with our eyes, and that is together held together by Jesus? You're talking about them wanting to make war. If they could somehow try to figure out the voice of God, in essence, they might figure out some way to dismantle it. But whose voice would they be following to try to do that? Who was it that said he's going to make war against God, and still thinks that in the end time somehow he's going to win? Now, there's one other thing that's very interesting about CERN, and that is they're trying to find the theoretical particle graviton, but they believe not only is graviton capable of moving into other dimensions, this is part of string theory, but they think that if it can, then they might use it as a way to communicate, put it together like strings of zeros and ones in computer language or something, and communicate with whatever is over there on the other side. And you've said this, and it isn't really tongue-in-cheek. You've said this in the past. You know, we're sending this message, here we are, come and eat us for lunch, right? Very concerning stuff, and it's happening right while we're doing this programming.
Well, here's a great definition of lust. It's not original, but I believe it's truly inspired. The appetite of demons expressed through humans. And the appetite for power. Interviewing over the years, I've interviewed a lot of people, some very, very wealthy people, in the B realm, billionaires, and they've said it's not about the money, Steve, it's about the power. And what power gives us is control. And that's the thing that basically Satan sells his disciples on, power and control. What's interesting is even when I get emails from some very nefarious, openly worshiping Satanists, they'll make the statement, Russ Dizdar is telling the truth. There's power in the blood. So the gluon, okay, I believe gravity is a pressure and not a wave. If you think about it, a pressure, if you're going to hold something together, you have to use a form of pressure, okay? Take your index finger or your trigger finger and your thumb, put it together, that's a pressure. Well, I believe that literally God is the Colossians 1:16-17, is the pressure that holds it together. So what they're trying to do is on a beyond subatomic, I would say subdimensional level, they're trying to blast apart creation. They are trying, and this is their last-ditch effort. This is truly war on the saints, but even more than that, it's war on God. And it's kind of like the chemists, you've heard the joke, the chemists are arguing and bragging about, look, they don't need God. Look what they were able to do. They took this dirt, they combined it with this substance, and a voice from heaven says, get your own dirt,
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so the point being is that everything that they're dealing with are forces. And they're already, let's just say this, whatever realm of composition they exist in, whether they're a holograph or a multidimensional. I try and share this on the radio sometimes, Tom, it's very frustrating. What most classic physicists learn is what they're told in universities.
Sure.
But what really exists is the physics of the ancients transcends and supersedes it all. It's like harmonic levitation. The only way that, and when I've been studying the giants and their nasal pharyngeal passages, I cannot find instances where you're not equating frequency, in other words, the shrieks or whatever, of sound or specific sounds generated that offset gravity. It's kind of like, if you will, it changes the molecular structure. And as I was sharing earlier on Tim Alberino's Gen 6 expedition to Peru, they actually found a secular engineer whose composite and structures, expertise is beyond question. He's saying, look, I don't know who did it, but whoever did it was able to change the literal mass of basically the granite, or the composition of the giant stones, and make them actually pour into each other. And that was the word he used, poured in. If you take your knuckles and put them together, obviously you can mash them together, but if it's offset and I can get this one to flow into that one without, quote, chipping, and by the way, Hebrew slaves did not do it with cords, okay? I mean, I got a guy giving me a treatise on how the Hebrews built the pyramids, and I said, good luck. You go to the step pyramid at Saqqara, and brother, that's like thousands of years before that, or the erosion of the Sphinx. So I think we have answers for people, but I think they've got to, no pun intended, but it is a good statement. They need to discern the times. Discerning of spirit is a gift of the Holy Ghost. You cannot live in this world without God's gifting. And you were raised in the Assembly of God. I was raised in the Assembly of God. And we can both look back and see definable supernatural miracles that we watch take place. We can watch the word of knowledge, the word of wisdom, and miracles. And see, that's the thing that's lacking. You talk to a true follower of the Prince of Darkness, and they'll tell you about the power. They'll tell you about the supernatural events that take place. They'll tell you all kinds of stuff, and you'll sit there and go, boy, they believe their Lord, meaning little l, the devil, to give them what they believe for, yet the Christians won't believe the God of heaven and what he's promised them. So discernment is going to be probably the reason why so many people perish for lack of knowledge. Because, again, in going up against things that they cannot define in their own context, they cannot understand no matter how they try and wrap around their brain, because it's a question of spiritual discernment. We can't get this stuff, I believe, without the help of the Holy Ghost. And then to keep it in a biblical perspective where the Word of God, and you said it earlier, God esteems His Word above His name. Jesus was the Word, okay? So what's a word? Well, a spoken word produce the written word, because we know that the prophets and the apostles and everything, they wrote what as the Lord moved them. David, quote, a lot of David's psalms are in a harmony and rhyme, okay? Even the rhyme and the harmony combined together. That's a a sonic issue. So I think this is fascinating. I think, where can we go except on Skywatch to talk about the majesty of God using the contemporary weapon of the fallen ones to try and go against God? And I read my Bible, and it says, the Word of God says Jesus is going to take with the sword of His Spirit and, with the breath of His mouth, Right. And so that's what's exciting to me. But in the meantime, people will be, how do I say this, overwhelmed emotionally. They'll be psychologically devastated. They'll be overpowered intellectually. They won't have the right biblical understanding to deal with this stuff, and that's what we do. Whether it's you and Chris writing the books you're doing, the whole Vatican card. And again, I want to make this clear. What's fascinating to me is that the very same people that you guys have chronicled, that at Mount Graham and all the stuff going on there, is the same group of people that in the last 2 to 3 months, as Tim Alberino's gone halfway around the world 2 different times, is they're always there, and as I told you, being spied on, I always like to, I told Joe this, it's always amazing to me to see how much trouble we can get in such a limited amount of time. But the point is, when you're dealing with core reality, this is core stuff. This is the very fabric and essence of creation. People who have twisted it and distorted it really don't want you to tell the truth. Somebody said the most dangerous thing is to be right when the government's wrong.
Well, and now let's take another step here, because you also wrote a book called Xenogenesis. We're going to make this book available. In fact, I'll just go ahead and tell you that you can get a copy of Steve's book, Xenogenesis. What's it about? We're going to tell you that in just a moment. This book is huge, like all the other books that Steve produces. It retails for $40. If you would like to get a copy of that during this program, you can call the number that will be on the screen, or you can visit skywatchtv.com to get a copy of Xenogenesis. And if you do, we're going to throw in my inferior attempt at writing on the same subject matter. And what is that subject matter? We're going to give you that one free. So both of those books would normally be about $60. We're going to give that to you for $40. The subject matter is transhumanism. Now, what in the world does transhumanism have to do with portals? Well, I've always believed that when the Watchers came down in the days of in the days of Jared, and Noah's great-grandfather, in essence, they were using human material, blending it with animal material, creating a life form outside of the divine order. But why would they want to do that? Well, Peter and Jude both quote the book of Enoch. Absolutely. It's saying that their purpose for doing that was they wanted to leave their fixed habitation, their place in heaven. And they saw that new biological construct as a portal, a way, a method to move from their reality into our three-dimensional reality. So isn't it interesting that in a way, it isn't just metaphysical gateways, stargates, portals, thin places where the barrier is thin between some other dimensional reality and our reality. But these entities can also use biology. By corrupting what God made, they can create a unit into which they can extend themselves into our three dimensions. So in that sense, that too is a kind of portal. That's what you wrote about in Xenogenesis. That's what I wrote about in, well, the whole title, Forbidden Gates. We're talking about a gateway, a doorway. Now, you were telling me a moment ago that just today, the Chinese have revealed that they've already started germline genetic engineering, which is kind of really the taboo line that you're not supposed to cross over in human genetic engineering, right?
Right, and can I say something? From everything I've been told, everything I know, and I couldn't know this without the people who have access to it, they're so far beyond what they're admitting to. They are so far beyond. Okay, it was tough for people when I first went on talk radio, the short version, 20 years ago, to accept that human beings could be cloned, okay? Mm-hmm. It was really tough. People say, well, I can't read that in popular science. Well, of course you can't, and I'll leave off what I should say after that. But the point being is, this is we got to keep this right, Skywatch. I don't want to get you in trouble. Yeah. The point being is that they don't understand that we're so far advanced, okay? I asked a special operations general, active duty. So it's not some guy retired 40 years ago with the top secret clearance, okay? I said, how far are you realistically? He says, when you take the alien technology, we're thousands of years in advance. Thousands. Well, how can you be thousands of years in advance when you're still dealing with rockets that you have to use chemical propulsion? Well, that's only for the public. You see, there's a giant sleight of hand going on. This is the magician's, what would you say, world of illusion, politics, and what you see that we hear, the wars and all the things they do. That's just to keep the masses distracted and extract money from them. But the real advances in propulsion, in human genetics, I remember a man, I tried to lead him to the Lord. I could not do it. I failed. He was an illuminist. His dad was a super rich guy. And the point being is, when you see a grown man and also work for a certain intelligence agency as somebody that takes out bad people, the point being is when you see a grown man telling you that there are genetic experiments in secret government labs, and this guy's a tough guy who bragged about all the evil he's done, and yet he weeps and weeps like a little baby. And I tried. I couldn't. He'd gone over the line, but he did want his son. But he just said this. He said, no matter what they tell you, it's way beyond that. It's way beyond that. And he talked about the literal island of Dr. Moreau.
Well, Steve, if people have a hard time believing that fact, last year, the Academy of Medical Sciences, which is Britain's equivalent of our FDA, put out a book 150 pages long, saying that literally thousands and thousands of what they call ACHM, animals containing human material. Yes. Now, they weren't just talking about embryos that had, 1% human genetic material, because they said that these things had been raised to maturity. They said some of them borderline human sentience.
Right.
So this is advanced technology, but they also talked about very disturbing things about how some of these creatures, they said, some of these creatures might also be able to procreate with regular humans. So we are literally now talking about the island of Dr. Moreau.
We are.
And this is not weekly world news. This is a highly level-placed body of scientists that work for the British government that put this out. And interestingly, they weren't calling for a prohibition on the science. They were saying that there ought to be a international regulatory body. Well, that's what they're talking about now today. China admits that they've been doing germline genetic engineering. You hear this again. Well, we need an international regulatory committee to get everybody to agree to a moratorium. It's never going to happen, right? If the science exists, we got 1 minute left in the show. If the science exists, you and I both know that this is already happening. You got like 45 seconds, Steve, to tell me what we can make of this.
The Garden of Eden is now as real, the temptation, as it was in Adam and Eve's day. It is now. They are trying to create, the Luciferian scientific make war on God community is literally trying to do away with all humanity. You've warned about it in Singularity. I've warned about it. We've both written about it. It's not a future event. It's happening now. The wars that are getting ready to happen as Russia, China, everything's basically going, if you will, ballistic. It's like nuclear rods going into a reactor, and the point is I don't know when it explodes, but it's just about to explode. As it explodes in the natural realm, it will explode in the negative spiritual realm.
And so we literally have entered into a fulfillment of end times prophecy as it was in the days of Noah.
Yes, sir.
As you've so often said, and of course you've wrote about in your work. Steve, it's sure been wonderful the last 4 weeks being able to do these programs with you, recording programs that are playing out over a 4-week period. I hope you'll come back again sometime soon and do it again. Keep us updated on what's going on with Gen 6 Productions, Timothy Alberino, the documentary series. I know that if people want to contact you through stevequayle.com, maybe they can even help you fund some of that expedition.
They can be a partner in it, and we need that because what we're doing is, Tom, 6 to 8 episodes. Each episode can cost pretty close to 6 figures. We basically are on the trail of the true Atlantis. And by the way, Atlantis was destroyed for their genetic modification experiments.
I'm sorry that we're out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Join us again next time on Skywatch TV. Thanks, Steve, for being with me.